Death is a transition that is probably the most important transition you'll ever make.
I think we tend to assume death is not going to come for us until in old age. When we're younger, we sort of put that aside.
I believe that death is not a frightening experience once you recognize that death is only death of your body. It certainly is not death of your soul.
When a person is born, we rejoice. And when a person gets married, we celebrate. But when a person dies, we try to ignore it.
I trust my death to the same God that I trust my life to. And I don't really worry too much about what's out there. If it's all of one piece.
My God lets people die. We all die sometime. So it's getting farther from my mind. I don't think about every day that I might die of cancer, but it's in there that I have had it and I could very easily get it again.
This is oatmeal. This is my standard, the one I can make without looking at a recipe. Bread baking is healing in a lot of ways. Just the creating of something that my family can have and my friends can have. A lot of times in the last 3 years, I haven't felt very creative.
3.5 years ago, we were on Christmas vacation in Lancaster with our relatives, and John said, "Is this supposed to be there?" And he touched something hard, and I said, "No." I knew right away that that was abnormal.
The finding out part for me had to do with me originally finding the lump. Prior to us knowing anything about what it was, which has been sort of a significant piece for me throughout this whole thing, was in a weird sense feeling sort of responsible.
And I had an appointment with my gynecologist on January 5th. As soon as she felt it, she had an appointment with the surgeon before I was off the table. So the next week, I had my first surgery, and that's when they found out it was cancer. It was in my lymph nodes already. So I started chemotherapy. And I did that for 4 months, and then radiation every day for 42 days, every weekday.
For a while, I used to really kind of get upset when I would think about her dying because the prognosis was fairly good. And so I would say to myself, so why are you thinking about this? This isn't what you're supposed to be thinking about. And would try to stop that process, which didn't work. And so when I would let myself entertain that, I finally could go, well, this is part of the process that I have to go through to know that that's a possibility, and it's a reality for all of us.
When people have young families, I find that's much more difficult for them. It's harder for the children, too, to understand why this is happening. And under those circumstances, clearly there's a great social turmoil associated with that. On the other hand, for the individuals themselves, I think it's a process of growing towards allowing yourself to let go.
We really have tried to have as much fun as possible in the midst of the pain. We instituted new holidays like half birthdays. Like today we're celebrating Maria's half birthday. I mean, I would have never thought about doing that before, but we were just looking for every chance we could find to celebrate life.
Dear Maria, happy 9.5 to you. Woo, all in one shot.
And I used to think, oh, I don't want to go to heaven. Life is so good here. I don't want to miss anything. And I would even pray that God wouldn't come back until after this next party or after my next birthday.
We have in our society an aversion to death. We try desperately to pretend it doesn't exist. In fact, I think that that's not just a new thing. I read the story of Lazarus again yesterday. And there they had the same issues that they dealt with in the death of their brother, the same feeling that even though intellectually we all know we will die, everything that's born will die, we don't think it'll ever happen to us.
She was diagnosed in January, and probably February or March, I started building the fish pond because she loves the sound of water, and water for her is very healing. I did it for her, but I also did it for me because it gave me something to do, and it kind of turned off my head, turned off my thoughts. I learned a lot about anxiety. Being a therapist, working with people who have anxiety and those types of struggles, I learned a lot about it from my own personal level. You know, difficulty sleeping at night, and the helplessness piece, the ability to do anything in the face of something like this that was totally out of my hands, you know, which is one of the reasons I built the fish pond, because it felt like I could do something.
I know about a year ago, somebody said to me something about how did you deal with the death part, and I said, well, I didn't really think about death too much, and I looked at John and he said, you didn't? I said, why did you? And he said, every day. So I think he was the one that was well enough and to deal with the death question more than I was.
I realize that when I'm fearful and resisting what is coming into my life, it wears me out. I become very irritable. I become angry. I become a person who wants to be away from everybody else around me because I don't like what's coming to me, and I don't like who I'm becoming because of it. So I would hope that the older I get, the more accepting I get. To allow yourself to entertain all the questions about this person may die. I may be faced with living with someone who's dying, and I may be faced with their death. I guess my experience was on the days I struggled so hard not to entertain those thoughts that life became much more difficult. And I guess that's partly accepting that as people we will be fearful.
The first thought I had when I found out I had cancer and that I might die was, I just want to watch my kids grow up. And I had this desperate hold on life for that reason. And that was very good for me as I look back, because before that, I was always struggling between how much do I work, how much do I put energy into my career, and now I have these 2 children, how much do I spend time with them? And there was nothing that would have stopped me as clearly as having cancer, to show me that my priority was my kids.
Whoa! Life for us has other meaning and value than just surviving, just a physical existence. It has to do with relationships and humanness and being at one with our neighbor, our families, and that's where the value and meaning in our lives comes from.
The priorities become very much so my relationships with Sandy, with my children, and with my friends. And I guess partly because you realize that you're kind of heading on a path in life towards certain goals, and all of a sudden something stops you dead in your tracks, and you realize that no matter how hard you try, you may never make that goal, accomplish that thing that you want to do because of an illness, either for her or for me. And you just begin to think about, so why do I spend so much energy going after these things? Where am I going in such a hurry?
I thought, well, if I've gone through this, and I was thinking about a lot of the losses actually, the loss of those 3 years of being as energetic as I wish I could have when my children were young. And then I thought, well, there has to be something positive. What do I have that I wouldn't have had if I hadn't gone through this? And one of the things I thought of was being able to tell other people that God is with them, no matter if good or bad things happen. I guess death just doesn't seem that bad of a thing anymore to me. It seems like it can be a real relief for people that are sick, especially, and also it just feels like something that is going to be better later, no matter how good this life is.
My mother, Florence Grant, is 77 years old. She went for another CAT scan, for her yearly CAT scan, and they found a spot that was outside of her liver. Only at that time I wasn't told specifically what it was, just that it was an enlarged lymph gland, and they wanted to do another biopsy. So they did one, and it came back positive. And then from there, they said she might have as little as 3 weeks.
So since that procedure, she has just steadily gone downhill very slowly. She cannot speak. She's in bed all the time. We have a hospital bed that's been a big help, and hospice has been in over the last month and a half or so.
The main points of our philosophy are that we provide comfort, which means we take care of the pain, and then also that we provide the support the family needs, the patient needs, for them to stay in their home if they so choose.
Palliative care originated about the 1960s in England. It's a fairly new field of medicine that deals with comfort, that brings comfort to the symptoms associated with dying, but more than that is to deal with the physical symptoms and get those out of the way, so then we can start having people deal with the emotional and spiritual and social issues, the family issues that surround the dying process. I guess the concern is whether she needs to be here or in the acute facility for a while.
About 77% of hospice patients do die in their homes, and usually the family is most comfortable with that because it's their normal setting. They can be at home at the end, they can watch the birds through their window, they feel comfortable with their home setting. They just seem to die more peacefully if they are in their homes very often, because they are with the people they love and in their normal setting.
I just was very prayerful that if at all possible, if cancer is what's going to take her life and we can do it at home, that I'd like to be able to do it. I think you can't be hard and fast on it, and I think it's cruel for people to make their family promise, you'll never put me in a home, because you don't know what the circumstances could end up being.
We've found that there are 5 things that people at their end of their life feel are important in order to bring quality to their life. One is the control of symptoms, the physical symptoms. The next is some degree of control, some feeling that there is still some participation in the decision-making process. The next is that people are beginning to talk more and more about what is appropriate in treatment. The fourth is that they want to lessen the burden on the family. That has become increasingly important. And the last thing is that people really wish that their families become closer, that they deal with issues in the past that have been unresolved. When I participate in what I consider a good death, I see family, I see peace and comfort with the process.
We were going to go to a wedding in North Carolina, and my brother in Maryland was going to take my mom, but when we decided we had to cancel it, he said he would come up that weekend and visit her then if she had progressed to that point where she couldn't leave town.
Abby. Ellen.
And then my niece decided to come the same weekend.
So good to see you.
And then my sister decided to come.
Jackie.
And then the next thing I knew, my brother in North Carolina was going to come.
Oh, my clan has...
Your clan is clanned.
And so it ended up that they all came, what was Father's Day weekend, which really was nice in the fact that my mother had raised us since we were ages 5 to 15.
Happy Father's Day, Ma. Happy Father's Day to you.
And she was able to be walked with 2 people to the table.
Safari, Nana? Mom, you going on a safari?
So it looks like it, doesn't it?
Often we see people who wait until someone can arrive before, and then peacefully let go at that time. So it's a well-known thing that people do feel a need to hold on for some reason. And often they will wait until the family is ready and can accept the fact.
It was told to us when it gets to a point where we know there's no hope at all, that we can just tell her that it's okay, you know, let go. Everything is going to be fine. Don't worry about anybody or anything. Just let go.
My mother is very terminally ill. She's end stage. She's in the dying process. There comes a time when you have to stop feeding her, and that's hard to do. At first I thought, you know, it's hard to withhold something from your mother when you know that when you withhold food or drink that this causes the body to die. But you know she's going to die anyway, and it's still in God's timings. That all these nurses coming in help you understand all these different things and when to stop doing these things and why.
As physicians are trained to preserve life, to cure where possible. And unfortunately, it becomes difficult for us to quit. It's like giving up. It's like we've struggled this far. And truly, there is a helplessness, not only on the patient's part, but on a physician's part, when suddenly you're confronted with a situation that you're not going to be able to cure. And that's a struggle that physicians go through. And unfortunately, sometimes we deal with it by not letting go, not giving in soon enough. And we are starting more and more to think about how important it is to ask family and patients and share the decision.
Lead me to the rock that is higher than I am.
Life is a gift of God, that we as a people are stewards of that gift, that we need to take care of that gift. That doesn't mean that we worship it, that we prolong it when death is inevitable, and death is a part of that natural process.
I mean, and yes, we could sustain my mother's life by putting IVs in her. We could give her more chemotherapy. We could get a few more weeks. We could extend her life. But with death, that has to be as natural as we can have it, as close to natural, I feel, based on the Lord is the one that decides our comings and our goings, and our days are numbered. And He knows that number, not me.
It is concerning about euthanasia that a third to two-thirds of people say it would be okay and that they would seriously consider it if they had a disease that couldn't be cured and if they were in pain.
I contend out of experience that if their pain is dealt with and if they have people to support them, suicide doesn't even come into their mind. We fear what we don't know, and we fear things when we're alone. And if we take care of those two things, I don't think people normally even think too much.
The church as a whole needs to feel the humanness of death, that death is a part of life, that it is a natural process, but that what goes on is our spirit and our soul and our love.
I think we define healing too narrowly most of the time as physical healing. I have seen patients that when they came to peace with what was happening in their bodies, they came to peace and healing. They were healed of their whatever it was that had been upsetting in their lives. I trust my death to the same God that I trust my life to. And I don't really worry too much about what's out there.
Until the day God calls.
A funeral is one of those rituals that comes at a very significant time in life, and life has these special kinds of events.
And I think that death, through the ceremony of the funeral, gives you a chance to think about those larger issues and also think about the personal issues. How am I ready for my death? It's that point in time where you are confronted. You can no longer dodge the fact. You have to look at it.
I think a funeral is very significant because man is created in the image of God. And it shows respect for the body, that it's sacred. And I think that it can leave a lot of memories. Well, I'm 90 years old now, and soon be, in a couple months, be 91. I think someone has said that they've estimated there are 200 decisions that need to be made at a funeral. So I think I've taken care of some of them. I've selected my pallbearers. I've selected the hymns that I want to have sung. My grandson is going to give the message. I told my sister, I said, I'm going to make my own casket. Oh, she said, that's creepy. And I said, well, I make grandfather clocks and I'm not afraid of time.
Dad has lots of ideas, and so this was just another one that come out, and so we kind of wait and see if there'd be some fruition. Dad, I think these look real great.
I do too.
Can you tell us a little about them?
Well, I had some ideas of my own, and then the man that's going to conduct my funeral, he let me in his showroom, and I looked things over and saw what they were like, and got some ideas, and so this is all my own idea.
And so he talked about it for a while, and then he began to assemble things and get things ready to go, and well, you know, maybe he is going to build a casket. So then you begin to get serious, well, where are you going to put these things, and how are you going to store them, and when are you going to need them, and I think we just came, we do things as family, and we look after the senior part of our family, and we look after the younger part of our family, and it's just one of the things that we do.
I think it's a part of wisdom to prepare. And I've had many comments on it. One I think is very significant. A young fellow asked me about it, and I told him that I made my own casket, and he said, well, hallelujah, you're not afraid to die. He said, you looked the rat straight in the eye, and you didn't blink. I think about $300 would cover the cost of the caskets I made, whereas at the funerals, parlor would probably pay $4,000, $3,000, whatever, I don't know.
The average cost for a funeral, and this would be excluding cemetery expenses or final disposition, it would only be the services and the merchandise purchased at a funeral home. As a whole, the average cost for a funeral is about $5,400. And again, that's not any of the cemetery costs, because cemetery costs vary so widely across the country. Here in the Midwest, an opening and closing of a grave is $200. You get into your larger cities like Chicago or Detroit, or your grave opening cost maybe $1,000. And you get involved with unions and those kind of things, and so your costs go up. There are all across the country what we would call in the funeral industry, there would be third-party casket sellers, where people, maybe that's all they're doing, they're retailing caskets to the public.
There's also some churches have moved to where they have built a casket that can be used as a communal casket for viewing purposes, and this can be used. I mean, the church owns the casket, and you don't have to buy a casket every time, particularly when cremation is involved.
Probably when I began 25 years ago, we would have maybe a 2 or 3% cremation rate in the Goshen area. And now we're probably between 10 and 15%.
The reality is, not everybody dies with the body intact. There are accidents and bodies are burned, and there are deformed, people are born with deformed bodies.
You can have a body and be in a grave for how long it takes, and I guess if it's long enough, you'll become ashes too. And you're dead, you're dead. The body is just a temporary thing that we have anyway.
The resurrection hope doesn't depend on our body being intact in the ground, because it won't be.
So a person may choose cremation as a final means of disposition, but they can have as much or as little of all the other services that they want.
My mother had never really talked too much to me or ever written down what she wanted. And one day, jokingly, when we were talking about cremation, she said, well, when I die, there's 4 of you kids, you can just cremate me and put me in 4 bottles and send everybody a bottle and just don't worry about it. I'm going to be in eternity and who cares anyway. And I said, okay, Ma, and that was just, you know, just laughed that off, and that was the end of that. Then one day we had a lady friend visiting us. My mother said to her, well, Simone, when you die, what are they going to do with your body? And Simone says, they're going to cremate my body and take me home to Saco, Maine and bury me. And my mother said, that's what they're going to do with me. And I looked at my mom, cremation? Oh, wait a minute, we hadn't. So that, I put the brakes on, and right then and there we talked about it, because I wasn't going to let it get away.
I was very glad that I had already had my will in place, and we had already talked about how we wanted to die and how we wanted to be buried and all that stuff.
I have a living will, and I have stated that if there is a serious illness that I did not want in my old age, the doctors to use heroic measures to keep me alive, because I'm sure I am ready to meet my Maker.
One of the things that we did in the congregation here at College Mennonite, actually, they've done this several times. There is a little booklet dealing with death. It's a guide to resources. And this was developed to help people to see the reality of death and that it comes and how can you plan. This is one of the ways our congregation has worked at this to encourage advance planning and work. Many people find it very difficult to sit down and put those kinds of plans down. And the reality was I had moved to retirement before my wife and I filled out our own and filed it in the church office and in the file here. So as I say, it's people delay that. It's not an easy thing to do. And yet many people, having done it, find a great deal of freedom.
And it's really neat when you sit down and you talk with that family and the minister walks in with a file and they've got retirement pictures that they'd clipped out of the newspaper, anniversary events, special significant events in the life of that person that had been recorded in the newspaper, for instance, all cut out, and how that brings back memories as we sit and do the planning.
One has to begin going through a number of kinds of things. When and what is the nature of the funeral service and or the services that are part of that. There will be the need to work with the funeral director, and when will that happen? Will there be a family prayer service, more a private service for the family?
We will have a couple of pictures in the church, and we've picked, you know, we've asked her favorite hymns and so forth, and we'll go with that.
Does burial come first, and then the memorial service that follows, and then the nature of the memorial service or the funeral service, or does burial come after that? Those are some initial kinds of logistics.
My mother will be buried in her family plot, which has Mann is the last name, M-A-N-N, so the main stone is there. So there's a place for my mom to be buried, and we are going to have bagpipes, music. We are partially of Scottish descent.
I try to encourage people to have a kind of service that reflects the life and the values of the person that died. What was meaningful to them and what's meaningful to the family are the kinds of things that they should include in the service. I think a funeral, if it can bring closure and reconciliation and healing to a family, then that has been a good experience.
The church was wrapped around us. Their presence was probably the most profound thing that they gave us. You know, there was, through the meals, through their coming and staying with our children when we had an appointment.
I remember one person gave me a joke book, a close to home joke book, and that was nice. It was admitting that I was still a human being, that I still had a sense of humor, and that I could laugh, and that's what I wanted to do then. I wanted people to recognize my illness and not skirt around it, not be afraid of it, but also not to dwell on it, and to know that there was still other parts of my life.
It's been nice that my husband and I have received cards from people, and my mother's received a card because they're talking to her on one level and us on another, like people that maybe have been through this before, a little helpful hint here or there, and then they send a different note to my mother.
I think death is part of living. And if we have that fully in mind, we'll be aware that the things that are really important to me are not what I can accrue in terms of money or titles or whatever, but the relationships I cultivate.
We make such a hullabaloo about death, as if it's such a terrible thing. We really try to avoid even thinking about it. And we have to become more comfortable. A little wave in the ocean that was basking in the sun and having a grand old time until he recognized up ahead that the other waves were crashing up against the beach and becoming destroyed. He became really distraught, thinking, oh no, is this what terrible end we're in for? And the wave beside him said, why are you so distraught? And the wave said, well, don't you understand? That's our end. We're going to crash and become nothing. And the second wave said, no, you don't understand. You're not a wave. You're a part of the ocean.
For an internet guide to resources on dealing with death, go to thirdway.com/facing.